This here's about the American West. Well, west of New York City anyhow. You see, the nation hadn't been able to use much of the land west of the Appalachian Mountains because it was just too difficult to move goods to and from those markets. The trains changed all that. Now, the nation had a quick and reliable form of transportation. Go west, the man said. And so they did, by the trainload. In the middle of the 1800s, things were right tough in the old world of Europe. Most of the land was owned and controlled by the aristocracy, and that meant few opportunities for the common folk. But in America, you could make a name for yourself instead of having to inherit the right one. Whole German communities picked up and resettled in the Midwest, lock, stock, and barrel. Sometimes you could barely tell you weren't back in the old country. Say, that there is a right interesting story. It's a story about a race. Two companies, the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific Railroads, set out to connect the east and the west coast of the United States by rail, although at the time they weren't so united. However, by the time they finished, everyone was mighty proud, and none too shy to say so. Half of the journey here was the job of the Central Pacific. Their task was to challenge the Rocky Mountains themselves. Nacogdoches, Texas. Now, it didn't have much of a ring to it back in 1888 either, but that year it put the state of Texas on an industrial track that hasn't derailed yet. Thanks to Patillo Higgins and Captain Lucas. These fellers risked their entire fortunes on this little used stuff that locals call Texas tea, black gold, or maybe you've heard the name, oil. Yep, Texas had a new industry from that day on, and it didn't include cattle. Go figure. In 1941, America had just entered World War II. Now, they were right stubborn at first. Didn't want to get involved in European politics and such. Well, that changed after Pearl Harbor. The war stirred up a hornet's nest of transportation worries. War means men and material, and that meant transportation. The fact that it was World War II meant that it was one humdinger of a scale. They could have used your know-how, don't you think? Back in 1848, monarchies were being threatened all over Europe. It was about that time that a young man named Otto von Bismarck started work on unifying the Germanic nations in Central Europe. He saw the upheaval as the perfect opportunity to create a German nation under one centralized government. He was no man of the people, but his political and social savvy saw that these small countries could grow together into a major power in Europe. In 1860, Britain's worldwide empire was well underway. However, the infrastructure on the island itself was not up to the task of fueling the world's first industrialized nation. No town in Scotland was in greater need of rail link than Edinburgh. Now, this was no easy task, because laying the track was only one half of the job. This line needed to become the essence of British railway engineering, speed, and efficiency. Now, think you know what it takes to make this kind of thing happen? The Alps. Them's one tough chunk of rocks, that's for sure. For centuries, it's been a difficult barrier and made travel from Italy to Germany too costly for commerce. That's where the train come in. See, getting through and making a connection to the north and south means a whole new world for Europe. Yep, treasure and commerce was had by those brave enough to challenge them mountains. Sure is one heck of a rock, though. It was after France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War that the French citizens once again demanded political change. The result was a new government known as the Third Republic. It was a fragile start, though, like a scared little rabbit. They needed to prove this government was strong and resourceful. So they took to building up the country's infrastructure. I think you'll see it weren't so easy. Now, this here is the legacy of the Orient Express. This railway was one of the most romantic and celebrated railways in the world. It was started in 1883 and was one of the first European railways to regularly cross national borders. Its most exotic leg of the journey started in Vienna, Austria, in the ancient city of Turkey. Getting the train going on this route was a monumental task of both politics and engineering. Not a job for the casual tycoon. Back before 1880 in Argentina, attacks from Native Americans in the Pampas region west of Buenos Aires made expansion into the interior difficult. In 1879, General Julio A. Roca began what was called the War of the Desert, and by 1880, he had quelled all hostilities in the West and opened ranching and farming for exports. Now, this sparked what was to be the longest period of growth Argentina would see to date. For 2 decades, the great tycoon Cecil Rhodes struggled to build the longest, toughest railroad of them all. The railroad that would connect the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa all the way up to Cairo at the northern end of the continent, crossing the plains, jungles, and desert. He only got partway there before dying in 1902. Many have tried to complete this link, but in over 100 years, no one has yet to succeed. You sure you got the stomach for this job? Oh, that there was quite a dilemma. On June 16, 1964, an earthquake registering 7.5 hit Niigata, Japan. A few people lost their lives. It was quite bad. Help was badly needed if more people weren't going to suffer from lack of supplies. The city was all beat up, right bad. Maybe you could lend a hand? After the global warming catastrophe during the early half of the 21st century, the polar ice caps melted and exposed new areas that once were covered by snow and ice. Newly exposed areas became prized real estate in these dark times. Greenland was one of these places. Unfortunately, the land was barren. That's when some scientists put together some genetic seeds. Seems they done fixed them so they grow real quick like. The problem is getting them to spread out before they gone bad. You gotta think fast if you're gonna help out. Holland never says die. The Dutch were at it again, and they reclaimed their homeland and then some. 20 years after being one of the first nations claimed by the rising waters generated by global warming, the Dutch, who were then living on floating atolls, began to start building dikes again. With that and them newfangled windmills, they done pumped out a whole new home from the seas. People's coming in from everywhere, though, and ain't much left of the old transportation system. You got any ideas? Seems the huge shift in world geography was apparently more than that poor old San Andreas fault could take. It snapped with a vengeance and tore a big chunk of California away from the mainland of North America. Fortunately, it heaved up above sea level, too, and exposed a soggy but usable chunk of land. Well, now they gotta get resettled out there on that island. It's been a long road from America to Africa. You rode the rails of Europe and Asia, and then back again. Your victories mounting with every turn of the wheel. You conquered a world of challenges and showed everybody what you're made of. Not many could have done it, and few are still even willing to try. Even when things were at their worst, you stood tall. Now, the people you've helped have something for you. Could say your train has come in. Step up and greet your friends. You've certainly earned the name Railroad Tycoon.